She doesn't belong here. Children like her don't fly first class. The words, sharp and cold, sliced through the quiet hum of the cabin on Flight 447. Vivian Ashworth, a woman in her 50s, stood with an accusing finger pointed at 9-year-old Zara Montgomery, who sat silently in seat 2A. Tears traced silent paths down the young girl's cheeks. "She's clearly in the wrong section," Vivian continued, her voice laced with a venom that seemed to poison the recycled air. "People like that family can't afford these seats. There has obviously been some kind of mistake. Or fraud." But Zara was a picture of perfect composure. She wasn't loud or disruptive. She was simply sitting in her assigned seat, clutching a small stuffed elephant, her mind racing to understand why a stranger was saying such cruel things. The flight attendant, Sarah Chen, knelt beside her, trying to offer comfort as the terrified child trembled. Vivian's accusations, however, only grew more venomous. "I don't feel safe with her type on this plane," she declared, projecting her voice for anyone who would listen. "You never know with children from that background. She's probably dangerous." Around them, passengers began to stir. Phones emerged, some discreetly recording the shocking display, others looking on with discomfort, yet remaining silent. Airport security was already making their way onto the aircraft, summoned by Vivian herself, who had convinced them that this innocent 9-year-old was somehow a threat. But as Vivian Ashworth stood there, spewing her hatred and demanding the child's removal, she was profoundly ignorant. She had no idea who she was truly dealing with. In less than 5 minutes, a single phone call would unleash a truth so staggering it would shatter her world. What Vivian was about to discover would not only unravel her life, but would also teach everyone watching a lesson they would never forget. To understand the magnitude of the storm about to break, we must go back to the beginning of the day, to a beautiful morning in one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. Within a sprawling estate in Lincoln Park where manicured gardens stretched toward the horizon, the sun gleamed off floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside an elegant dining room, 9-year-old Zara Montgomery sat at a marble breakfast table, her legs swinging with excitement as she shared pancakes with her mother, Victoria. This was no ordinary breakfast. This was the moment that set everything in motion. "Mommy, I want to fly to Daddy's by myself. I'm big enough now," Zara announced, her voice filled with the unshakable confidence only a 9-year-old can possess. Her mother, Victoria, an impeccably dressed woman whose commanding presence spoke of immense power, looked up from her tablet. She had been reviewing reports from her aviation empire. Victoria hesitated, a conflict playing out behind her eyes. The CEO who understood the world's cruelty warring with the mother who wished to build a fortress around her daughter's innocence. She believed deeply in raising her daughter to be independent, but the world could be a harsh place, especially for a young black girl. "Sweetheart, you know how I feel about you traveling alone," Victoria said gently, but Zara's eyes shone with determination. "But you always say I should be independent, that I have to prove I can handle things myself." There was something in her daughter's resolve that melted Victoria's protective instincts. After a long pause, she nodded. "All right, but we do this my way. No special treatment, no announcements about who you are. You will travel like any other passenger." Victoria had always guarded Zara's identity. Despite owning Montgomery Aviation, one of the largest airline companies in America, she wanted her daughter to have a normal childhood, to be judged by her character, not by her family's wealth. Zara practically vibrated with excitement. This trip to see her father in Los Angeles was more than just a visit. It was her declaration of independence. But while Zara dreamed of adventure in her mansion across town, another woman was facing a very different kind of morning. Vivian Ashworth awoke in a cramped studio apartment where the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and desperation. Bills were scattered across every surface. Overdue rent notices, credit card statements with terrifying balances, and, displayed like a morbid centerpiece on her kitchen counter, an eviction notice that made her stomach clench. At 52, Vivian's life was a ruin. Failed business ventures had left her drowning in debt, and her relationships had crumbled. Now she was down to one last chance, a business meeting in Los Angeles that could either save her or obliterate what little she had left. With trembling hands, she used her final, unmaxed credit card to book a first-class ticket to LAX. It was an expense she couldn't afford, but in Vivian's mind, appearance was everything. She had to project success. As she stared at her reflection in a cracked bathroom mirror, her internal monologue turned ugly. "People need to know their place," she muttered. "There's a natural order, and some people just don't belong in certain spaces." These weren't fleeting thoughts. They were the deep-seated prejudices that festered in her mind, a bitter balm for her own failures. She genuinely believed that success and status belonged to people who looked like her. Meanwhile, at Chicago O'Hare Airport, another player in this drama was about to reveal her own biases. Jennifer Walsh, a gate agent stuck in the same job for 8 years, had developed a twisted sense of social hierarchy. When well-dressed white families approached her counter, her face lit up. But for passengers who didn't fit her narrow worldview, her demeanor turned to ice. She made snap judgments based on skin color and presumed economic status. Working Flight 447 that day was a crew who had no idea they were about to witness a shocking reversal of fortune. Flight attendant Sarah Chen and Captain James Rodriguez were good people who believed in fairness, but they were entirely unaware that the quiet little girl in seat 2A was the daughter of their ultimate boss. Victoria Montgomery, kissing her daughter goodbye, didn't realize she was sending her straight into the ugly reality she had worked so hard to shield her from. And Vivian Ashworth, donning her designer knockoff outfit, had no idea she was about to target the one child who could destroy her entire world with a single phone call. What happened next at Chicago O'Hare was a devastating lesson in the mechanics of prejudice. It was a busy Friday afternoon at Gate B12. The first unaccompanied minors to approach Jennifer Walsh's counter were Emma and Sophie, two adorable white girls, ages 8 and 10. The moment Jennifer saw the blonde-haired, blue-eyed children, a switch flipped behind her eyes. "Oh my goodness, how exciting!" she exclaimed, clapping her hands. "Are you two flying all by yourselves? What big girls you are!" Her voice was sugary sweet. She came around from behind the counter, knelt to their level, and produced coloring books and extra snacks from a personal stash. "I'm going to make sure you get to board first," she promised. Then she made an announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have some very special young travelers with us today. Let's give a wave to Emma and Sophie." The waiting area responded with warm smiles and a smattering of applause. For 20 minutes, Jennifer treated the girls like celebrities, checking on them, bringing them juice, and calling ahead to inform the flight crew of the darling little passengers who were boarding. Then, 9-year-old Zara Montgomery approached the same counter. She walked with a quiet confidence, carrying her small backpack, her unaccompanied minor paperwork identical to the previous girls. But the moment Jennifer Walsh looked up and saw her, everything changed. The warm smile evaporated. Her posture stiffened. This child was not a special traveler. She was a problem. "Can I help you?" Jennifer asked, her tone flat and annoyed. Zara, still beaming with excitement, handed over her documents. "Hi, I'm flying to Los Angeles to see my daddy." Jennifer took the papers, and when she saw the first-class designation, her expression soured into outright suspicion. She held the boarding pass up to the light as if inspecting a counterfeit bill. "This says first class," she said slowly, her voice dripping with doubt. "Are you sure this is correct? These tickets are very expensive." Zara's smile faltered. She sensed something was wrong. "Yes, ma'am. My mommy bought it for me." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "Maybe you should double-check with your parents. Sometimes there are mix-ups." Remember, Jennifer had never questioned Emma and Sophie's documents. But here was Zara being treated like a fraud simply because the agent couldn't fathom a black family affording a premium ticket. "I need to verify this," Jennifer announced loudly, making a show of calling a supervisor while Zara was forced to stand aside. She felt the stares of other passengers, their whispers creating a prickling heat of shame and confusion. Minutes earlier, 2 other girls had been celebrated. Now, Zara was being treated like a suspect. "Ma'am," Zara said politely after the call, "is there a problem?" Jennifer looked down at the respectful child, and her response was chilling. "Well, these things happen. Sometimes people make mistakes about what they can afford." After 15 more minutes of unnecessary delays, Jennifer reluctantly allowed Zara to board. There were no treats, no special announcements, no warm wishes, just a cold proceed to the gate and a look that screamed disapproval. Zara walked down that jet bridge with her head held high, though her heart ached with a hurt she couldn't yet name. She found seat 2A, stowed her backpack, and settled in with her stuffed elephant, Sky. Pulling out a book about airplanes, she tried to reclaim her excitement. For a few peaceful moments, she was just a little girl, lost in a story, completely unaware that her ordeal was far from over, because that's when Vivian Ashworth boarded the plane. Vivian strode down the aisle with an air of manufactured importance, her knockoff handbag on prominent display. She glanced at her boarding pass, seat 4C, then scanned the front of the cabin. First class was her domain, a space for people like her. But when her eyes landed on the small black girl in seat 2A, her entire worldview seemed to fracture. It couldn't be right. With a saccharine smile plastered on her face, she approached. "Sweetie," she began, her tone dripping with condescension, "I think you're confused. This section isn't for people like you." Zara looked up, her eyes wide. "Ma'am?" "This is the first-class section," Vivian said, her voice growing sharper. "I don't know how you got that ticket, but the regular seats are back that way." Zara's heart began to pound. "This is my seat," she said quietly, holding out her boarding pass. "It says 2A. Vivian snatched the pass from her small hand. "This is for successful people," she announced, loud enough for others to hear. "Not for, well, not for people like your family." The implication was as clear as it was ugly. "Ma'am, this really is my seat," Zara insisted, her voice trembling. "Don't argue with me, young lady," Vivian snapped, her mask of politeness falling away. "I'm an adult. I know how these things work. Now gather your things and move." Just then, the flight attendant, Sarah Chen, noticed the commotion. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. Vivian turned to her, triumphant. "Thank you. There's obviously been a computer error. This child belongs in coach." Sarah looked from the boarding pass clutched in Vivian's hand to Zara's tear-streaked face. "Ma'am, may I see both boarding passes, please?" After a careful examination, she addressed Vivian. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this young lady's seat assignment is correct. She is in 2A. You are in 4C. The color drained from Vivian's face, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "That's impossible. There's been a mistake, or fraud. Families like hers don't fly first class." Vivian Ashworth had no idea that the mistake she was so determined to correct was about to expose a truth that would bring her world crashing down. And Zara Montgomery, sitting there under the weight of a stranger's hate, was about to show everyone what real power looked like. Vivian, failing to remove Zara through legitimate means, was about to cross a line, weaponizing the most dangerous stereotypes about black children in America. As the flight attendant confirmed the child's seat number, a crack formed in the foundation of Vivian Ashworth's world. She stood in the aisle, a statue of indignation, watching the impossible unfold. This was not how things were supposed to be. The universe, as Vivian understood it, had rules, an unspoken hierarchy, and a small black child had no place in the rarefied air of first class, certainly not next to a woman of her standing. But Vivian had built a life on bending reality to her will. If procedure wouldn't remove the girl, a well-crafted lie would. She would paint this innocent child as a monster and make everyone believe it. Just as the flight attendant, Sarah Chen, turned to help another passenger, Vivian saw her opening. She leaned toward Zara's seat, her voice pitched just loud enough for those nearby to hear, and began to spin her venomous web. "Excuse me," Vivian called out to Sarah. "I need to report something. This child has been behaving very inappropriately." Sarah turned, a flicker of surprise on her face. She had just left the girl, who seemed perfectly calm. "I'm sorry? What do you mean?" "This child was being aggressive and intimidating toward me," Vivian declared, gesturing down at Zara. The little girl, book still resting in her lap, looked up, her expression one of pure bewilderment. "Ma'am, I was standing right here," Sarah said, her confusion growing. "I didn't see any aggressive behavior." But Vivian was just warming up. "Before you came over, she was giving me threatening looks, acting very suspicious. I'm telling you, something isn't right with her." Zara's 9-year-old mind struggled to catch up. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the strange, angry woman. "Ma'am, I was just reading my book. I didn't do anything." "See?" Vivian said with a triumphant sneer, as if Zara's denial was proof of guilt. "She's lying. I know aggressive behavior when I see it. A ripple of awareness spread through the nearby seats. Passengers began to watch the unfolding drama. Some looked skeptical, but others cast new, suspicious glances at Zara, the quiet child suddenly recast as a potential menace. Sarah looked from the agitated woman to the tearful little girl, trying to reconcile the accusation with the reality before her. "Ma'am, I really don't see a problem here. Perhaps if we could all just—" "No, you don't understand," Vivian cut in, her voice rising with manufactured urgency. "Children from her background, they can be unpredictable. I've seen the news. You never know with these kids." The thinly veiled racism landed with a thud in the quiet cabin. It was an attack not just on Zara, but on an entire community, a dangerous stereotype given voice and wings. "I've worked with troubled children," Vivian lied, building her fiction brick by brick. "And I'm telling you, this one has all the warning signs. She's the type that causes trouble." Zara was crying openly now, her small hands clutching her stuffed elephant. This stranger was turning her into a villain. "I didn't do anything," she whispered through her sobs. "I just want to see my daddy." Vivian was relentless. She had found her weapon, the deep-seated prejudice that she knew so many people harbored, and she would wield it until she got her way. "Look at her now," Vivian said, pointing to Zara's tears as if they were evidence. "That isn't a normal reaction. That's guilt. Something is seriously wrong here." Doubt began to creep into Zara's mind. The woman was so confident, so insistent. It was the insidious nature of racism making the victim question their own reality. "Ma'am," Zara said, her voice trembling, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Vivian snapped. "I am a paying customer in first class, and I demand that something be done about this disruptive behavior, immediately." Passengers were now openly staring. A few raised their phones, sensing a confrontation escalating beyond the norm. An elderly man in seat 4A finally spoke up. "I've been watching this whole time. The little girl hasn't done a thing wrong. She's just been reading." Vivian wheeled on him. "Sir, with all due respect, you don't know what happened before you were paying attention. She was being threatening." "I was reading about airplanes," Zara said softly, holding up her book as if it were a shield. "My mommy works with them." "See?" Vivian pounced on the innocent remark. "She just keeps making things up. First she belongs here, now her mother works with planes. Classic signs of a troubled child." The poison was spreading. Vivian twisted every word, every tear, into a confirmation of her narrative, criminalizing a child's natural reactions. The flight attendant, now completely out of her depth, wrung her hands. "Perhaps I should call the captain?" "Yes," Vivian agreed instantly. "And I think you should call security. This child clearly needs professional intervention." The word security struck Zara like a physical blow. Her eyes widened in terror. "Please don't," she whispered. "I didn't do anything bad. Can I call my mommy?" Vivian saw the child's fear and seized it. "You see? Now she's panicking. This is exactly what I was worried about. We need to act before this gets worse." What Vivian did next was an act of calculated malice. Excusing herself to the restroom, she slipped instead into the galley, pulling out her phone. She dialed airport security, and when the call was answered, she began the performance of a lifetime. "Hello?" she said, her voice a perfect blend of concern and urgency. "This is a passenger on flight 447. I need to report a very serious situation. There's an unaccompanied black child in first class who has been acting threateningly toward passengers." The officer on the line was immediately on alert. "Can you describe the threats?" "Intimidating gestures, menacing looks," Vivian lied smoothly. "She doesn't belong here, and she's making everyone very uncomfortable. I'm genuinely concerned about what she might do." "How old is the child?" "Maybe 9 or 10, Vivian replied, "but age doesn't matter these days, does it? She seems very unstable." "Is she with an adult?" "No, completely unaccompanied. That's what makes it so concerning," Vivian said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Look, I don't want to sound alarmist, but given everything happening in our society, I think we need to be very careful. You never know what these kids are capable of." Her meaning was unmistakable. She was painting a 9-year-old girl as a security risk simply because she was black. "We need to remove her from the aircraft before something serious happens," Vivian urged. "The other passengers are getting nervous. I'm worried for our safety." We'll have officers there in a few minutes, the dispatcher assured her. Thank you, Vivian said, adding one last theatrical lie. I just hope we're not too late. She returned to her seat, glowing with a smug sense of victory. I've taken care of it, she announced to Zara and the nearby passengers. Security is on the way to handle this properly. Zara overheard, and her small body shook with sobs. What did I do wrong? This is for everyone's safety, dear, Vivian said coolly, looking down at the terrified child without a shred of remorse. Ma'am, you called security? Zara was aghast. I really don't think that was necessary. It was absolutely necessary, Vivian interrupted. That child is disturbed, and I will not wait for something bad to happen. The cabin was now divided. Some passengers defended Zara, while others, swayed by Vivian's confident fear-mongering, looked on with unease. Just then, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay while we address a security procedure. We appreciate your patience. A chill went through the cabin. All eyes turned to Zara, the small, weeping center of a security threat she couldn't comprehend. Please, she begged Zara, her voice barely a whisper. Can I call my mommy now? She told me to call if anything happened. What Vivian Ashworth didn't realize, as she sat basking in the success of her hateful scheme, was that she had just lit a fuse. The phone call Zara was about to make would not just bring comfort to a frightened child. It would bring the full weight of justice crashing down upon her. As security boarded the plane, ready to treat an innocent girl like a criminal, they had no idea they were about to confront the most powerful family in the aviation industry. The words spoken into the phone echoed in the sudden silence of the cabin, changing everything in an instant. This is Victoria Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Aviation. You are questioning my daughter on an aircraft my company owns. Officer Maya Patel stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind reeling. Around her, whispers erupted as the name registered. The quiet little girl in seat 2A, the one accused of not belonging, was the daughter of the woman who owned the entire airline, not just the plane, but the whole fleet, the company. Derek Thompson, Maya's partner, stared wide-eyed, first at his partner, then at Zara, who was still clutching her elephant, oblivious to the bombshell her mother had just dropped. The irony was staggering. Vivian had targeted the one child on Earth who literally owned the seat she was sitting in. Phones came out as passengers frantically Googled Victoria Montgomery. Faces went pale. They had just witnessed a public attack on the daughter of one of the most powerful women in America. Captain Rodriguez, hearing the name from the cockpit, came rushing down the aisle, his face ashen. Officers, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Montgomery, if someone has been targeting her daughter with false accusations. Before he could finish, the cabin door opened again. Victoria Montgomery herself stepped aboard. She moved with a commanding presence that seemed to consume all the air in the cabin. Dressed in an elegant charcoal business suit, her posture impeccable, she was every inch the titan of industry she was known to be. And she was a mother whose child had just been terrorized. Behind her was Marcus Thompson, her head of security, a former Secret Service agent whose imposing frame left no doubt as to the seriousness of the situation. They were followed by 2 more security personnel and a member of her legal team. This was not a concerned parent. This was a CEO conducting a full-scale corporate investigation. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. Passengers sat straighter. Conversations died. This was the moment a bully was about to meet the full consequences of her actions. But for all her power, Victoria's eyes went straight to Zara. Her expression softened instantly at the sight of her daughter's tear-streaked face. She walked directly to seat 2A, her heels clicking sharply on the floor, and knelt, pulling Zara into a fierce, protective embrace. Mommy's here, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice full of love. You're safe now. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Zara clung to her, the fear and confusion finally pouring out. Mommy, that lady was so mean to me. I was just reading my book like you taught me. I know, baby, Victoria said, stroking her hair. And Mommy is going to make sure nothing like this ever happens to you or any other child ever again. Then, Victoria stood. When she turned to face the cabin, her expression was once again the steely mask of a CEO ready for battle. Officers, she said to Maya and Derek, her voice ringing with authority. I want to see every piece of security footage from this incident. I want witness statements from every passenger. and I want a complete timeline from the moment my daughter boarded this aircraft." Marcus stepped forward, a tablet already displaying video from multiple angles. They had footage the airport security team hadn't even seen yet. Victoria watched, her jaw tightening with controlled fury. The video was damning. It showed Vivian's unprovoked aggression, her escalating lies, and finally, the audio of her phone call to security, every racist, coded word captured in perfect clarity. "Where?" Victoria asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is the woman who made these accusations against my daughter?" Officer Maya pointed toward Vivian, who was trying to shrink into the background, the catastrophic reality of her mistake finally dawning on her. Her face had drained of all color. She recognized the woman from her business research. She was staring at Victoria Montgomery. Victoria walked directly to her. "Ms. Ashworth," she said, reading the name from the manifest on the tablet. "I'm Victoria Montgomery. I believe you have some explaining to do." Vivian stammered, her earlier confidence utterly gone. I don't understand what's happening." "You don't understand?" Victoria repeated, her voice as calm and sharp as a shard of ice. "Allow me to clarify." She gestured toward Zara. "You saw a black child in first class, and you decided she didn't belong. You decided that a 9-year-old girl, because of the color of her skin, had no right to occupy this space." "No, that's not what happened," Vivian protested, but her voice was a weak, unconvincing whisper. Victoria's voice cut through the tension, sharp as shattered glass. It was the voice of a woman who had dismantled corporate empires with a single sentence. "You made an assumption," she said, her words clipped and precise. "A racist assumption based on nothing more than your own prejudice, that my daughter does not belong here." A profound silence fell over the first-class cabin. Phones emerged, their small red lights blinking as passengers recognized they were witnessing a moment that would soon be shared millions of times over. "Let me tell you what actually happened," Victoria continued. Her voice, though never shouting, resonated with a controlled fury that seemed to charge the very air in the cabin. "You summoned security. You made false claims that my 9-year-old daughter was a threat. You attempted to criminalize a child, a 9-year-old girl who was sitting quietly reading a book about airplanes." Vivian's face paled, the gravity of her miscalculation finally dawning on her. "There must be a misunderstanding," she stammered. "I was just concerned about safety, about the seating arrangements." "Safety?" Victoria's voice was ice. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop with her words. "The only threat to safety on this aircraft was your bigotry and your willingness to lie to law enforcement about a child." She turned, addressing the entire cabin, her voice carrying to every passenger and crew member. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have just witnessed was not a misunderstanding. It was not a safety concern. This was racial discrimination in its most toxic form. An adult attempting to humiliate and criminalize a child because she believes black families do not deserve to occupy the same spaces as she does." A murmur of agreement rippled through the passengers. Some nodded, others looked away, deeply uncomfortable with the sudden realization of their own complicity in their silence. An elderly man in seat 4B finally spoke. "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm ashamed. I saw what was happening was wrong, and I did nothing to help your daughter." A young mother nearby added, her voice trembling slightly, "I wanted to say something, but I froze. I am so sorry your little girl had to experience this." Victoria acknowledged them with a nod. "I appreciate your honesty, but I hope the next time you see someone being targeted, you will remember today and find the courage to speak. Our children, especially, need us to protect them from this kind of hatred." Her gaze settled back on Vivian, her expression unyielding. "This behavior has no place in our society, and it has no place on this aircraft." Victoria's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Ms. Ashworth, you are hereby banned, for life, from all Montgomery aviation properties and aircraft. That includes our 12 airlines, our cargo services, and any future acquisitions." "You can't do that!" Vivian's voice was a desperate shriek. "I have rights. I have business travel." "You had rights," Victoria corrected, her tone as cold and final as a judge's gavel. "You forfeited them when you filed a false report against a child and weaponized racism against my family." Marcus, her assistant, stepped forward with paperwork that had been prepared mid-flight. "Ms. Ashworth, you are being served with a formal trespassing notice. You are also being reported to law enforcement for filing a false police report, a felony in this jurisdiction. The reality of her situation hit Vivian not like a train, but like the slow, crushing certainty of a landslide. She was banned from a global airline conglomerate. She was facing criminal charges. The last-ditch business meeting in Los Angeles, her final hope to salvage her collapsing finances, was now an impossibility. "Please," Vivian begged, all her prior arrogance dissolving into the raw desperation of someone watching their world crumble. "I made a mistake. I was just trying to help." "You made a choice," Victoria stated, her voice firm. "You chose to see a black child in a space you decided she didn't belong, and you chose to remove her with lies. Those were not mistakes. They were deliberate acts of racism." As security officers moved to escort a protesting Vivian from the aircraft, a strange sound filled the cabin. Applause. It was a release of tension, a celebration of justice served swiftly and decisively. "This is discrimination against me," Vivian shouted as she was led down the aisle. Victoria's final response was swift. "You are being punished for racism. There is a difference. It's a difference you should have learned long ago." Throughout the ordeal, Zara had watched from her seat, processing the events with the quiet resilience of a child. When Victoria returned and knelt beside her, Zara looked up, her expression a mixture of confusion and a wisdom far beyond her years. "Mommy," she said, her small voice cutting through the lingering tension, "I hope that lady learns that all kids deserve to be treated with kindness no matter what they look like. Maybe this will help her be nicer to the next person." The simple, profound grace of her words hung in the air. A child who had been the target of such ugliness was responding not with anger, but with hope. Around the cabin, passengers were silenced by the display of maturity and compassion. Some openly wept. Victoria hugged her daughter, overwhelmed with pride. "You are the most amazing, wise, and brave little girl in the world," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Over the intercom, the captain's voice was grave. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire crew, we sincerely apologize for the delay and for the unacceptable treatment one of our passengers endured. Montgomery Aviation is committed to ensuring all travelers are treated with dignity and respect." The flight finally departed 3 hours late. When they landed in Los Angeles, David Montgomery was waiting at the gate. He swept Zara into his arms, lifting her high. "I heard you were a hero today, sweetheart," he said, his smile beaming. "I am so proud of you." "It was scary, Daddy," Zara admitted, "but Mommy made it all better." What Zara couldn't yet understand was that her story was already igniting across the globe. Videos from the flight had gone viral, sparking a national conversation. Headlines blared, "CEO Mother Defends Daughter, Delivers Swift Justice to Racist Passenger." Victoria's decisive action became a case study in corporate responsibility, while Zara's quiet grace inspired millions. For Vivian Ashworth, the consequences were a catastrophic, cascading failure. The business meeting was canceled. Criminal charges were filed. Her name, now inextricably linked with public disgrace, made future employment an impossibility. The racism she had wielded as a weapon had backfired, annihilating the very future she was so desperate to save. Victoria, meanwhile, channeled the global attention into action. The Montgomery Foundation announced a $10 million fund to support organizations fighting discrimination in travel. It was a stark reminder that while racism still exists, a single courageous stand against it can echo around the world.